So we've mentioned before that the marginal revenue curve of a firm operating in a perfectly competitive market is a horizontal line. Okay, it's just equal to one fixed price. So that means that the price doesn't change no matter the quantity that that individual firm produces. Okay, this is also equal to the demand curve. It's also the same horizontal line at that same price, where the value is independent of the quantity produced. So we have the price determined by the market here, and no matter what quantity we produce, the price doesn't change. So we just get this horizontal line. This is equal to the demand curve and the marginal revenue for that particular firm, for that individual firm. Now we've also mentioned before that the best output level that an individual firm should operate at is where their marginal revenue is equal to their marginal costs. So if they have increasing marginal costs, that means that their costs go up with their output, then they should produce more and more and more until the cost of the next unit is as big as the revenue they gain from the next unit. And that means that that particular unit will not be making any money. And if their costs are greater than their revenue, then they shouldn't produce that next unit. Okay, so the firm should produce where the marginal revenue and the marginal cost curves intersect. Now, if we show these curves on a graph, we can show how we can calculate the profit that the firm will generate. Okay, so we start by drawing the axes, the quantity axis and the price axis. We then draw the firm's average total cost curve. That's this curve here. And remember that it will be at a minimum where the marginal cost intersects with that curve. Okay, so we can draw in the marginal cost curve as well. Next, draw in the demand curve. Remember, that's equal to the marginal revenue curve, and it's just a horizontal line at the price. Okay, so these two curves are equal, and it's just this horizontal line here. Now, to find where the firm must operate, it should be where this marginal revenue intersects with the marginal cost. So we will say this is the quantity that the firm should produce. And the reason for that is that above this quantity, the marginal costs exceed the marginal revenue, so it will not be worthwhile producing another unit above this level. If the firm is to be profitable, then this point here, where the quantity that the firm should produce at, must be above this line here. Okay, this line being the average total costs. Now, what we mentioned previously is that if this average total costs curve is including the opportunity cost, we would expect in the long run that this would actually be up here and touching this point here, meaning that there would be a zero profit. But in the short run, it could be anywhere. It could be below it, in which case there will be an economic profit. It could be above it, in which case there will be an economic loss. Or it could be that we're representing the average total costs, not including the implicit opportunity costs. Okay, so this graph finds this point that the firm will produce at as being 50 units. In order to calculate the total revenue, that will be equal to the quantity produced multiplied by the price. and that can be represented by a rectangle. Remember that a rectangle is the area of a rectangle is calculated by multiplying one of its sides by the other of its sides. Okay, so by multiplying this side of the rectangle by this side of the rectangle, we are actually multiplying the quantity by the price. And as we've mentioned here, the quantity by the price is actually giving us the total revenue. So the area of this rectangle here represents the total revenue of the firm. In this example, that is 50 multiplied by 20, giving us a total revenue of $1,000. Now, the average total cost at that output, that quantity that we'll be outputting, which was determined by this intersection here, the average total cost at that output is given by the intersection of this line with this average total cost graph. So it is the average total cost at this quantity produced here. And in this example, the average total cost, if we go across to the price axis here, is $16. Okay, so if the average total cost is $16 and our firm is producing a quantity of 50 units, then the total cost will be found by multiplying these two numbers together. And again, graphically, that's represented by the area of this yellow triangle here. So the yellow triangle is our total costs, whereas the larger triangle, including this pink part here, is our total revenue. So that means that our profit will be the difference between the total revenue and the total costs. So the profit will be this area here, the difference being the large rectangle subtracting out this smaller rectangle here. So when we calculate the total cost for this example, it will be $16 multiplied by 50 units will give us a total cost of $800. And we can see that the profit, which is the total revenue minus the total costs, can be represented by the area of this rectangle here, because our total revenue was the rectangle going all the way down to here, whereas the total costs was the rectangle going to here. So the difference between the two is this area here. And in terms of numbers, the total revenue was $1,000, the total costs was $800, and that means that the profit will be $200. Okay, so let's see all of those steps again for an example of a firm making a loss. Okay, so the steps: you draw in your marginal cost curve with an example with increasing marginal costs. You draw in your marginal revenue, which is the same as the demand curve for the firm, which, remember, because it is perfectly elastic, it's just a horizontal line at the fixed market price. And determining the quantity that the firm should produce in order to maximize their profit or minimize their loss will be where the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue. Because if the marginal cost were larger than the marginal revenue, then the firm would be losing more money. Okay. Now, at this intersection here, this will determine the quantity that the firm should produce. Okay, and it's only possible if this is above the average variable costs. Okay. So in this example, that intersection is at a quantity of 40 units. Next, determine your total revenue by multiplying the quantity produced by the price. And that is represented by this rectangle here in pink. So 40 units at $15 each gives a total revenue of $600. Next, determine the total costs by finding the average total cost, which is where this quantity 40 units intersects with the average total costs curve. Okay, so where this line here intersects with the average total cost curve is at a average total cost of $21 in this example. Okay, and to find the total costs, you multiply the average total costs by the quantity produced, or in other words, you look at this large rectangle going all the way up to there and going all the way out to here. And the area of that large rectangle will be your total costs. So in this example where the firm is making a loss, we can see that the total costs is going to be larger than the total revenues. And that's graphically represented by this rectangle going up to there being larger than the rectangle that only goes up to there. So it is a loss-making firm. So multiplying the average total costs by the quantity produced gives us the total costs of $840. Now when we apply the same formula as before to calculate the profit, pi, that being the total revenue minus the total costs, we end up with a negative number. So that negative number indicates the firm is making a loss. That is, the area of the upper triangle here will be the size of the loss. So $600 total revenue minus $840 total costs for a negative $240 of profit, or in other words, a loss of $240. Now we've mentioned that what we expect to see in a perfectly competitive market over the long run is that firms break even when we graph their average total cost curves as including opportunity costs. Okay, so if we include the opportunity cost of capital, which might be the interest of all of the money used to buy equipment, and the opportunity cost of the entrepreneur's time, that is, what else they could be doing. They could be working for another firm and making that income there. Then we will have the average total costs inclusive of economic costs. Okay, and so if we draw these curves for a firm that breaks even, what we see is that the average total cost curve intersects at a tangent the demand curve, which is the same as the marginal revenue curve, at the point where the marginal revenue curve intersects with the marginal cost curve. Remember that that intersection there between the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve determines the quantity that the firm will produce. Okay, so this will be the quantity the firm produces. And if the firm is breaking even, this average total cost curve, remember that that always intersects with the marginal cost curve at a minimum of the average total cost curve, and that intersection will be at a tangent to the demand curve, which is the same thing as the marginal revenue curve, just at the price determined by the market. So we've mentioned that always the quantity that the firm should produce should be where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. That assumes we have increasing marginal costs. So at this quantity here. So in this break-even example, the total revenue will be again equal to this the area of this rectangle, and because it will equal to the quantity produced multiplied by the price. And the average total cost will be where this vertical line here intersects with this average total cost curve and go across to the price axis here. So in the case of breaking even, we know that the average total cost will equal to the price. So in this case, if the average total cost is equal to the price, the firm will make zero profit. It will break even. It will not make a loss, and it will not make a profit. So to find the total costs, we take the average total cost and multiply by the quantity produced. And again, it's going to be graphically represented by the area of this rectangle here. And we can see the area of this rectangle is equal to the area of the rectangle that we previously calculated, representing the total revenue. So if the total revenue equals the total cost, the firm will make no profit. And just to make that clear, we calculate the profit. We take the total revenue, subtract the total cost, and we end up with zero. Okay, so now an exercise for you to calculate. The question is, in a competitive market, we have a marginal revenue of $70. And remember, in a competitive market, the individual firm doesn't have any effect over the price. So if the marginal revenue is $70, it is that value for every quantity that the firm produces. So it is this horizontal line here. No matter what the quantity is produced, the marginal revenue stays at $70. It's just a market price for a particular unit. So your question is to determine how much profit does the firm make. And remember that in the short term, firms in competitive markets can make economic profits. And also, if we're calculating just an accounting profit, they can also make accounting profits, right? And in this particular example, if you see that the average total cost curve is below this intersection between the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve, there's a marginal cost curve here, we have increasing marginal costs, then you know that the firm will be profitable because the average total cost is less than the average revenue, which is the same as the marginal revenue, at the quantity produced. So what are you going to do? How are you going to solve this problem? You will work out the quantity produced. So you'll go down there and work out what is the quantity produced. And then you will find the area of this rectangle here, because that will be the total revenue. It will be the average revenue, which is the same as the marginal revenue. It's just a fixed revenue per unit of 70, multiplied by the quantity produced, which is down here, which might be something like 27.5, something like that. And that will be the total revenue, the area of this rectangle. Then you will project this line over to this average total costs and bring it across to this axis here, and that will give you your average total costs, which would be around $35 here. Okay, and you will calculate your total costs by multiplying your average cost by the quantity produced. And again, graphically, that's represented by the rectangle up as high as this line here. Yeah. So your profit, this firm's profit, will be the area of the upper portion, this upper rectangle, from here to here, and from here to here. Okay, so calculate all of those values and you can work out what is the profit that the firm will make. It will be the total revenue, this big rectangle, minus the total costs, which is a small rectangle, and that will be the profit, which is this upper rectangle here. But do work out the actual values, and they're over on the next slide. So these are your answers. The total revenue is going to be 70 times 27.5. Okay, it was in units of thousands, so 27,500. The total costs is 35 multiplied by 27.5 thousand, and the profit is going to be the difference between those two answers. The total revenue minus the total costs gives the profit for the firm. Now the profit margin is what is the profit as a percentage of the revenue. So you take the profit divided by the revenue and express that as a percentage, multiplied by 100 to express it as a percentage. That is the profit margin. In this example, there's a profit margin of 50%, which is very high for a perfectly competitive market. Remember, in a perfectly competitive market, over the long run, we would expect this profit to be zero if we have calculated the total costs inclusive of opportunity costs.